Okay, you are listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHWWPPM. Tonight on the program, we will be joined by Vincent Thompson of Thompson Media Man Communications to discuss all things local government. And in the second half of the show, we are going to talk a little bit more about the budget and specifically the taxes, the tax decreases we're going to be seeing. So, Lance, how are you tonight?
I'm all right. I'm looking forward to hearing Vincent and talking about the city budget. And I'm hoping people are following because council's getting set to put this through.
We're always happy to talk to Vincent, and I believe he is here right now. So here's Vincent Thompson of Thompson Media Man Communications.
Hi guys, how are you?
All
Good.
right,
How are you tonight?
I'm good. Just at the office working, getting ready for that fun thing that we call the final budget day. You remember those days, Lance, where we start our day at 10 o'clock and don't end until 2 or 3 in the afternoon, getting everything together. I always like to say the last day of session, the last day of June session, the last day of December is like the kid that had homework due and they wait till the last minute to get all their homework done. So that's why we have a backlog. So we're getting ready for that.
Before we get into that, I'd like to bring in the last member of our team here, Denise Clay Murray. Not last, but here she is. Denise, how are you tonight?
I'm good. How are you? Hey, Vincent.
Hello. Hi, everybody. How are you?
So we're very lucky to have Vincent here with us tonight. So Vincent, I'm going to ask the first question here. We're getting to the end of this session. You had just talked about getting ready for tomorrow's last council session of the year. What is it like right now over these last few weeks, finalizing the budget, getting all those things taken care of? What is it like in the life of a city council staffer?
Well, it's just a lot of work. I mean, I tell people there's the mayor introduced, and Lance will understand this from working here, and Denise will understand it by covering it. The mayor's budget is just a starting point. All right. Think of it like the Triple Crown, right? So the Kentucky Derby is the start of the race. The mayor's budget is the Kentucky Derby, right? Then we get through the budget hearings and the budget discussions. That's the second leg of the Triple Crown, right? And now, after the second leg of the Triple Crown, that's really where the negotiation begins, like behind the scenes, where it's, what can we do? I'm a council person. I might want this thing in the budget. You're a council person. You want this thing in the budget. The council president gets all of the council members together, kind of finds out what they want to get in the budget. What are some of their wish list items as far as their district? What are some of the broad issues we can agree to? And then we start by kind of hammering out the budget, right? I always say that the budget is like a game of Jenga. You move one piece and it impacts another piece in the budget. So then you get to the point where everybody agrees, or you got the majority of people who agree. And anybody who knows city council knows there's 3 numbers that are really important in council. There's the number 9, there's the number 12, and there's the number 17. There's 17 members of council. You need 9 votes to pass anything. So if you don't even have 9 votes, most of the older members of council will say, don't even try to run it, right? Don't try to run a bill or resolution. And you need 12 votes to override a veto. So that's why you see a lot of legislation try to get 13, 14 signatures, either as the main sponsor or the co-sponsor. So now we're at that point where we hammered out the budget. And last week was where we hammered out the budget. So that's why we had such a late committee of the whole on, I think, like the 15th or the 14th. The days are starting to blend together as we get to this point. And that's where the budget is done. So the budget is locked in for the most part. You will see nothing happen tomorrow. You'll see no shenanigans. Nobody will suddenly say, I want to rip up the budget and add $15 million to something. It's locked in stone. Council will approve the fiscal year 2023 operating and capital budgets tomorrow, and they will all go into effect July 1st. And a fiscal year for government, for city government, goes July 1 to June 30th of the next year. And I always like to tell people the operating budget is the thing that operates, that pays the salary of the employees and the workers. The capital fixes the the building. So if there's a hole in this wall, it's probably the capital budget that's going to fix it. Now, the man or woman that fixes it will be paid out of the operating expense because he's a city employee. But the thing that will probably fix this wall, or if we got a new wall or a new fire truck or a new police car, that comes out of the capital budget. So that'll be all done tomorrow. But we have a final agenda that's like 16 pages long. So it's going to be a long day tomorrow. It's going to be a long day. There's going to be tax bills that are approved. My Councilman King Otter Johnson, the one I work for, he led the initiative of the new Save Our Homes property tax relief plan, which is going to probably pass. All the pieces are going to pass tomorrow. And there's also going to be business tax reductions and wage tax reductions, but minor wage tax reductions, because the city can't really cut wage taxes a whole bunch because that's how we get most of our revenue to operate. So we're addicted to the wage tax, and we're not going to end that addiction soon.
Now, Vincent, before we move on to talking a little bit more about the budget, tell us a little bit about the Save Our Homes property tax relief. This was a series of bills that the councilman put forth a few weeks ago. Honestly, I think right after the assessments came out. It's not that week, the week after.
Yeah, it was right after. So let me explain to folks what the Save Our Homes property tax relief plan is. The councilman, and he's the councilman for South Philly, Southwest Philly, and parts of Center City. We are one of those districts that's going to get hard with the assessments. Other parts are going to be hit hard too, like the 3rd district, Jamie Gaudier is going to be hit hard, and some other areas as well. And the average tax assessment is going to go up on average 31%. So some might be higher, some might be lower, but the average is really going to be 31%. And probably there's not going to be many people who are going to be lower than 31% on average. So the councilman worked with his colleagues to come up with some initiatives that will kind of lessen the impact of the tax burden in the city. So crossing our fingers, right? We expect the day will happen tomorrow. There's going to be a bill that will increase the city's homestead exemption from the current $45,000 that it is now to $80,000. That will give each homeowner almost $500 off of their property bill. So if you're already a person who has a homestead, you probably get on average like $630 off of your property taxes. This will go up to about close to $1,200, right? If this passes. We're also urging more people to apply for homestead. Because one of the things about a lot of these programs like homestead, the senior tax freeze, the long-time owner occupants program, is that a lot of people in the city are eligible for them. They just don't apply because they don't know the programs exist. So the more people applied, more people could get into the program. So the homestead exemption, for example, is one-page form. And you got to live in your house for 10 years. Most Philadelphians have lived in their house for 10 years. So they would get it like that. We're also going to extend the enrollment deadline for the senior tax freeze program, allowing low-income seniors to freeze their property assessments retroactively. So that could go back to as far as 2018, which would save seniors money. We're also going to make some changes to the long-time owner-occupant program. Inside government, we call it LOOP. That's going to significantly increase access for thousands of low-income homeowners. And those are 3 separate bills that have to be approved by council. And we expect that they will be approved because we have about 12 people who have co-sponsored. So I really expect those 3 bills I just mentioned are going to sail through council. But when we approve the operating budget, there's money in it that's part of our Save Our Homes. So we're going to allocate as a city at least $15 million to the city's rental assistance program for the 2023 budget. We know that the rental assistance program is basically running out of money. So this is going to help that program. We're going to have $2.5 million in the fiscal year 2023 budget for an outreach campaign from the different council offices to let people know about the programs that are eligible to them, right?
That's important.
Right, that's important. And also we're going to allocate at least $1 million in the fiscal year for free assistance for low-income renters. Because we know what's going to happen is people who own a property, if their property taxes go up and they have somebody to rent, they're just going to pass it along to the renters. So we want to give those renters money that can help them ease the burden on them as well. We just didn't think of the property owners. We also thought of the renters. And one last part of the Save Our Homes plan, we introduced a bill that would mandate transparency in the city's Office of Property Assessment, forcing them to report things to council earlier. We didn't get enough support. I shouldn't say it. We didn't get enough stuff done before we leave council tomorrow to get that up for a final vote. But the councilman's looking at having that up for a vote sometime in September when we come back. So we're going to get a lot of things done. So a lot of taxpayers are going to see a lot of good stuff. We held a press conference today about the bill, about the bills, and we were happy to be supported by Community Legal Services, who supports our bills. And also there was a woman who 71 years old. Her name is Mrs. Johnson, not related to Councilman Johnson, who talked about how if we approve this LOOP program and also the senior citizen tax freeze, Homestead and LOOP, her assessment in her house in North Philly could go from as high as her paying $2,000 in taxes to maybe $150 next year. So this is going to help a lot of people.
And for senior citizens on a fixed income, that's very important.
Oh, that's huge, right? I mean, the best home is the home you live in, right? So the one thing we don't want to do is have people get forced out of their homes, because that doesn't help the school district. Like the school district gets money from the from property taxes. 55% of all the money the city collects goes to the school district. So if you can't pay your property taxes, the school district doesn't get money, and we don't want people to lose their homes. So we think it's a win-win for everybody.
Now, speaking of the school district and the issues it had with all of these tax reduction bills in terms of the assessments, what has been worked out with them so that they get the money they need to educate our kids?
I'm glad that you asked that, Denise. We originally, Councilman Johnson wanted the exemption to go from $45,000 to $90,000. The school district said, "Hey, wait a minute. If it goes up to $90,000, it's going to hurt our budget. We don't want it to go up to $90,000." So we agreed to have it go down to $80,000, right? So the school district still gets money, and if there is some kind of deficit or hole, the city will find a way to cover that gap. Like, we contribute a lot of money to the school district anyhow. We can find extra money in the budget to do it. I mean, as anybody knows about education, it's been kind of weird. There used to be a time when the state gave the most money and the city was second, but now that's kind of shifted where the city gives more money at times than the state. And Lance, if I'm wrong, let me know, because I admit I don't know everything. But but it's kind of shifted. So if we need to give the district more money, that's why we do the mid-year transfer, Denise, where we do things like that. So if we need to do it, we can do it. So it's not such an astronomical amount that if we had to transfer, we would have to cut like street sweeping or trash pickup. But it can happen. But the councilman did listen to the concerns of the school district, and that's why we went down from $90,000 to $80,000 for the homestead exemption. And we have the support of council members, so that bill's going to get passed tomorrow.
Now, I'm sorry, go ahead, Lance.
Did the business community offer to chip in with a special tax to help the schools? I often hear business leaders saying how important education is. I was wondering, we have the liquor by the drink tax. I'm wondering if the stadium owners offered a tax by the seat for the schools or anything like that.
That is a good idea. I will pass that along to the council president.
But I'm taking the guess then that the business community didn't step up and say, the schools are very important and we're getting a tax break. We'd like to give half of that back to the schools.
You know what, Lance? I don't know what the negotiations were. I don't have the count. I'm not the council member, so I'm not in those things. But that's a great idea for the to bring along to the council president, and I will do that. And I will say this to anybody: if you have an idea, a suggestion about ways to reduce gun violence, tax rates, whatever, please send them to us at Councilman Johnson's email address. His email address is kenyatta.johnson@phila.gov. You can also go through our website, which is through the city's website, which is phlcouncil.com. I see all the web suggestions that come in, and trust me, Lance, I get all kinds of suggestions all the time. You know, this was one of those things, right, where people suggested, hey, we're going to get really impacted with property taxes. How can you help? We put our heads together, came up with these packages, and now they're becoming reality. So I tell people, no idea is crazy that you send to a council person's office, because that idea might become legislation. Lance, you can send that to me. I will send it over to the council president for next year's budget.
But you're very gracious, and as someone who worked for City Hall for many years, I would respectfully disagree. Some ideas are crazy.
Well,
I'm not going to say, you know what? I look at it differently. Some ideas might not be implementable. I don't even know if I'm making a word, right? But I don't think they're crazy because they come from like a good place, right? So it might, you know, if somebody said we should, you know, make a Billy Penn a Ferris wheel, right? And have a swing off the top of it, that might not be implementable. Might not mean it's crazy, but it just wouldn't be implemented. So I take all kinds of ideas because every idea could become some kind of legislation. So I will let you say with that.
You're more gracious than I am.
I would not say that, but I'm going to let that go. But like I said, I take them all because that, you know, I think good government leaders don't think we know everything, and sometimes I think citizens, because we sit in these seats, think we know everything, and we don't. Right? There could be an idea that we haven't thought of. You know, it could be simple, it could be complicated, but send it in to us. I won't take credit for your idea, but I sure as heck will try to implement it.
Well, speaking of ideas, in terms of the money that the state that the city got from the American Rescue Plan,
right?
Money that it was, let's just keep it real, hoarding for stuff that, you know, really makes no sense in the long run. How much of that pot is finally going to be spent on stuff that people have been requesting that the city do a little more of, like an anti-poverty plan, or I don't know, swimming pools or any of those things?
Well, we are opening pools. We're opening pools this year. We're opening 80% of the pools this year. That's up from last year. Now, I'm not sure if that money's from the American Rescue Plan that's opening those pools, Denise. I can tell you that the city is also going to invest $184 million in anti-violence programs. And the anti-violence programs aren't just like gun violence programs, but it might be keeping rec centers open. It might be keeping libraries open longer. It might be keeping pools open longer. I don't happen to have the number of how much of the American Rescue Plan funds are going to be used this year. But while we're talking, I'm going to try to do some research. And if I can find it for you before I'm done with my segment, I will. And if I find it after I get done with my segment, I will send an email to Larry, and you guys can put it on the show. But I'm not sure how much of the administration actually used in American Rescue Funds.
Okay, now out of that $184 million that's being allocated to anti-violence programs, is that the 155 that the city put in last year?
That's an increase.
Added to it.
That's added, right?
Okay.
Because remember, Councilman Johnson led the initiative to get the Kenney administration last year to add more money to the anti-violence budget, right? So the one thing that Mayor Kenney did is he added a lot of money without us even asking, right? So it wasn't like, oh, last year you gave 155 and now it's 160. We need more money. He started at like 185, 187. And council is happy with that number. I know the councilman is happy with that number. And, we're going to approve that. One of the key things that we have to do as a government is when we get money to boots on the ground organizations, and we get them to we say we're going to give you a grant. The administration's got to do a better job of getting the money to them, right? Because that's what we're hearing from community groups. They're like, we are part of this program. We've spent the money. We've given our invoices in, and we haven't gotten reimbursed in like 3 months or 4 months or 5 months. And to a mom and pop organization who's already going hand to mouth, right? That's difficult, right? You can only rob Peter to pay Paul so many times. So I think we can see that there needs to be a increase on getting the money faster to people, but we're looking at investing in those boots on the ground organizations to get things done. And I have to say to folks, you know, Councilman Johnson and other council members understand that this violence problem is just, I'm going to say it's just crazy, right? And we got to do something about it. But there's going to be short-term fixes and long-term fixes. And we didn't get into this problem of gun violence overnight, and we're not going to end it overnight. So I got to tell people that, you know, I know that the police department, district attorney's office, the mayor's office are doing everything they can to stop it in the short term. But some of the fruits is going to happen in the long term. And it might be a year from now. It might be 2 years from now. The one thing I can announce is that if you look at the police crime statistics, while the number of shootings are going up compared to this time last year, a good trend is that the number of homicides are going down. So I think we're like at maybe 8% or 7% less than we were at this time last year. So it's still an issue. It's still a crisis, right? We don't deny it's a crisis, but there's some trends in the right direction.
So this probably isn't your side of the house that would do this, but when we talk about,
I get asked about all sides of the houses, Larry.
Sure.
Go on. There you go.
But what I'm saying is, I understand if you don't have a full answer to this, because it's, you know, but when we talk about 184 million additional dollars going to anti-violence programs, I think one of the things that people would like to be able to see is, are there metrics that we can say, well, this investment is going to lead to, or at least we think will lead to X amount of a decline in gun violence? Do those kind of conversations come up in these discussions, or is it more like, we're going to put 184 million into these different programs that we think are going to be useful, but we're not sure what the end result's going to be?
Oh no, absolutely. I mean, you have to show stuff, right? I mean, Americans and Philadelphians want stuff. You got to show it. Like, I can't say I'm spending 184 million and people are going to ask a legitimate question. Well, what do I see, right? I don't see X being open. I don't see Y being open. It's like if we spend money on street sweeping, right? You got to see people sweeping streets, right? You got to see it, right? If we say we're going to tow abandoned cars, we got to tow cars, right? We just have to do it. And there are metrics that are done, but that's through the Office of Violence Prevention. I don't want to speak for that office, right? But I know that they have metrics that they're using to judge organizations and groups. But I've said it before, and I will say it often. The only ones that are going to save us are us as a city. And you have every right. And I know people are going to be hearing me and saying, well, that's your job as government. You're supposed to do it. Police can't do it all by themselves, right? The mayor's office can't do it all by themselves. Philadelphia Anti-Drug, Anti-Violence Network can't do it all by themselves. You know, PAN can't do it all by themselves. The whole city has to get involved in understanding that this is an issue, gun violence, violence in general, that impacts us all. And until we work as a group to get down to this violence and not just think of it in our silos as neighborhoods, we're going to have difficulty. I always say this about Philly. I love my hometown. I always say this. Philadelphia is a city of neighborhoods, and that's great. One of the worst things about Philly is we're a city of neighborhoods. And people kind of only look in their own neighborhoods as to what is going on. And if nothing's happening in their neighborhood, everything's fine. But once it creeps into their neighborhood, then an urgent thing has to happen to stop something. And I say this for all neighborhoods. I don't care if it's Society Hill, Center City, West Philly, North Philly. But we have to understand that this is a broader citywide thing, because, you know, violence just doesn't stop at a border. It doesn't just stop at like, oh, I live at 49th and Market. Well, it's going to stop at 52nd. Oh, I live in Chestnut Hill. Well, it's going to end at Germantown and Erie. It doesn't happen that way. We've got to think of it as a global thing. And that's why I tell people some of our problems are going to take a while to solve. So you might not see fruits for a while, right? But I clearly understand people have to see we've got to stop the short-term pain to give us an opportunity to get to the long-term game. We understand that clearly in this office, and we're fighting every day. As the chair of the office of, as Councilman Johnson's the chair of the Office of Violence Prevention, he fights every day on that issue. I literally am up with him sometimes late at night as he's thinking about policies and plans and ways to stop this. I can tell you this. I know he's definitely committed. This is personal to him. So.
And, as we get to the end of this budget cycle, is there anything else that stands out in this budget to you that is maybe innovative, different, unusual, something new here?
Ask me that in about a week when I've had a chance to go through about the 500-600 pages of the budget. Because I always say the budget is like an artichoke, right? Once you open it up, you pull back the leaves and you're like, oh, I didn't see that. Oh, I didn't see that line. Oh, I didn't know we were doing this program. Oh, I didn't know that was happening. So, but there's always something new in the budget, always something that we haven't tried yet. But a lot of the budget is keeping the things that we have going. Like I tell people all the time, the biggest part of a city budget is the wages and benefits of the employees, right? It's to pay Vincent Thompson my basic salary and benefits. It's paying the police officer. It's paying the firefighter. It's paying the sanitation worker. That's why when people say, oh, we've got to cut the budget. Well, when you cut the budget, you're cutting employees.
It's half the budget.
Right. It's half. So if you're cutting programs, you're cutting people. And that means there's less people to do more stuff because the demands of the city doesn't stop. If I'm not here tomorrow, if for suddenly I'm no longer with Councilman Johnson, media is still going to call who's ever sitting in the seat for something, right? If our constituent service rep isn't here, it's not like it's going to stop. Oh, we're not going to call about potholes. Oh, we're not going to call about alley lights and alley trees. It still goes on. So you need those people to operate government. But I've said this as I've worked, and Lance knows it. We've got 25,000 people in city government. The overwhelming majority of city government employees are honest, hardworking, dedicated, and make things happen. You ever want to know how great your city workers are? Go to sleep at night and then wake up in the morning of a snowstorm, right? They're the ones that's moving all that tons of snow so that you can get to work. They're the ones that are moving all that tons of snow so that you can get on SEPTA. So, city employees really work their butts off.
Or move your empty garbage can back, or turn on your faucet and get the water, or turn on the heat and turn on the stove and get the gas.
Yeah, well, that's what we do. I always tell people my grandfather was a sanitation worker for 30 years, right? That's a hard job, lifting them bags of trash and lifting refrigerators and couches and stuff like that. So I always say to myself, my job is pretty difficult, maybe mentally, but it's not as hard as the cop, the firefighter, the sanitation worker. So I'm very much in awe of the person that goes out when your gas pipes blow and fixes your gas pipes, right? The trash person, man or woman that's out in like 90-degree heat, throwing your garbage out so that the city still kind of functions. The cop that works the long hours, the firefighter, the paramedic, even the people in the water department that are under the ground, fixing those pipes. Some of them in our city are still wood. Right. And you still have some wooden pipes that have been around.
Real quick, Vincent, before we let you go.
Shoot.
PICA, the Pennsylvania Intergovernmental Cooperative Authority, those bonds are almost paid off. That's a 1.34 of the wage tax.
Mm-hmm.
Any chance we're going to be able to reduce the wage tax by that amount when the PICA bonds are paid off?
That's a good question. I've learned in this job, I don't answer questions I don't know, but that's a good question. I can reach out to the council president's office and see. But if that happens, that would probably be in next year's budget.
It was definitely next year, but just as a thought going forward, because all the people who are complaining about the wage tax, I don't know how many people understand that PICA bonds will be paid off, and here's an opportunity.
So Lance, let me ask, and that's a good question because I know that we're still under PICA control, but and I'll have to research this. Are we expected to end the payment to the PICA bonds next year?
I believe that's correct.
Okay, so like I said, we ended.
2024 is the last year, I think.
Okay, all right. Well, then we could probably, that's interesting that we would have it done by 2024 because by that time we will have a new mayor. So
I'll tell you this right now. My suspicion that will not be removed from the wage tax. That's my gut feeling right now.
Well, you know what? If you had asked me 3 years ago if we would have had a pandemic, I would have thought we never would. So I'm not going to predict what's going to happen in 2024, but I know we will be in 2024 under a new mayor. So what Lance brought up may just come about. I don't know if there have been any talks about that, but that's a way for, once we stop paying PICA back, that's a way for us to maybe cut the wage tax. That's actually a good idea.
I'll make another bold prediction.
Okay.
Again, could be totally wrong. I think it's better than 50-50 that PICA stays around after the bonds are paid off.
That's probably a good bet. That's probably a good bet. But you know what? I don't know. I don't know. Like I said, that 2 years from now, I don't have that crystal ball. But that's a good point, Lance. I did not know that the PICA bonds, our payment of the PICA bonds would end. But like I said, the interesting thing is if it happens in 2024, we'll have a new mayor. So a new mayor may decide that's what I want to do. He or she.
A lot of money. Thank you, Vincent.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Vincent. Talk to you soon. And it's always great to be with Vincent Thompson here on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia.
Now, how much are those bonds, Lance? How much a year has the city been paying?
So what happens is the city gave up a significant percentage of its wage tax to pay off the bonds. So there's two things. PICA, the Pennsylvania Intergovernmental Cooperative Authority, one has veto power over the city's budget, and two has a lien on roughly 25% of the city's wage tax. As to how much money is actually left to pay off the bonds, I don't have that figure. What I do know is what Larry was saying is that they will be paid off soon, and then one of three things will happen. The wage tax will dramatically increase the revenues for the city. Two, somehow someone will borrow more money, and that part of the wage tax will go to pay off those bonds. Or three, they'll lower the wage tax. I don't know how we pay for the infrastructure of PICA because they have an executive director, they have staff, they have offices. I don't know how we pay for them if they don't have a function. So I'm not quite as pessimistic as you are, Larry, that when the bonds are paid off, they still stay there. They no longer can control the city budget. They no longer have a reason for existing. We already have a city controller. We already have an inspector general. We have all those functions being fulfilled. And, the PICA was one more attempt by the Republicans in Harrisburg to control the city. I'm not sure that the city is so happy with all the attempts that Harrisburg's been making to give Seed even more power.
So I believe it was 2 or 3 years ago. I think it was pre-pandemic. If you look in the budget, when you see revenues, you'll see, I guess what you would call almost like a PICA refund, because not all of the wage tax is that portion of the wage tax is needed to pay off the bonds. So I think a couple of years ago, the city got about $500 million back from that portion of the wage tax. And I remember speaking with the executive director, Harvey Rice, who's very good to talk to. He really explains things. He goes out of his way. Because when I was first getting started with this, I didn't know what was going on. He was very good he even made me a graph that showed me how it, but I asked him, I said, well, this $500 million that we're getting back at that point, I think that would have paid off all of the outstanding debt. So it's definitely, I think it's a couple $100 million now that's owed, if maybe even less than that. Because I asked him, I said, what if we just paid it all off now? And got rid of that. And he said, well, that's not exactly how it works. This is kind of how the system's built. Okay, fine.
We're a couple years ahead of ourselves. It certainly could go to cover the pension liability, could go for a number of different things. But let's focus on what Vincent was kind enough to talk about, which is what's in this budget. Vincent did talk a little bit about what the tax cuts in the budget and a little bit about the real estate assessments. So I made a small presentation I'd like to call up. It kind of walks us through what's happening. And so, the first thing is what Vincent already said, which is that on average, there's a 31% increase in assessments. But the Inquirer did a survey, and what they found was that there's an increase of 60% in 5 zip codes in the reassessments. And so that is going to be much more than the average 31%. And we can kind of see that even though the average is 31%, on this map, and I don't know how easy it is for our viewers to see the map, certain neighborhoods are going to see the impact on a much greater level than others. And the map is color-coded, and the hotter red it is, the bigger the increase it is. And these are all neighborhoods where the demographics are changing. We might call it gentrification. We might call it turning over. We might call it the speculators have won. Whatever name you want to give it, these are all neighborhoods that are dramatically changing in population. They were predominantly African-American. They were predominantly working people, predominantly seniors, predominantly poor. And these neighborhoods where the assessments are going up the most are neighborhoods that are quickly changing over to young professionals. Now, again, I don't really want to get into whose fault that is or why that's happening or anything else. Each one of those questions has a very long answer, and reasonable people can disagree. But I think we should all be able to agree when we look at this map, where red is the highest percentage of assessments, that this is North Central Philadelphia and West Philadelphia that are going to bear the burden and bear the brunt of these new assessments. So, as Vincent said, the councilman he works for, Councilman Johnson, led the fight to increase the homestead exemption. Everyone who's listening, everyone who's viewing us, everyone who sees us on Facebook or sees us on the webpage, if you don't have the homestead exemption, please file for it today. It is very significant. And everybody is eligible. Unlike the other programs where we don't know what the eligibility is going to be quite yet, the senior citizen rate tax freeze and the longtime owner occupant tax freeze, we don't really know what those rules are going to be like. We do know the rules of the homestead exemption as we talked this evening, and that is if you live in your home, you qualify for it. Has nothing to do with income, has nothing to do with how long you've been there. It's simply, do you live in your home? If the answer is yes, get the homestead exemption. And what the homestead exemption means is that you are going to have some portion of the assessed value of your home that you don't pay taxes on. So to make it really easy, if your home was worth $145,000 last year and you got the $45,000 homestead exemption, which every homeowner who lives in their home qualifies for, you would have only paid taxes on $100,000, not the $145,000. Now, Philadelphia, like every other part of the state of Pennsylvania, is complicated when it comes to real estate taxes. Wage taxes are relatively simple. You pay a percentage of what your wages are. By the way, it's a wage tax, not an income tax. If you make your living by getting dividends, by investing in stocks and bonds, by having LLC income, you don't pay a wage tax. You're supposed to pay a school income tax. And again, that's a story for another day. But the wage tax is a Republican dream. It is a flat tax only on working people. Unlike even the federal taxes, where the more you make, the more you're supposed to pay. the progressive city of Philadelphia wage tax charges a flat rate where the less you make, the higher percentage of what you give goes to taxes. So the real estate tax is two parts. What is your house worth and what is the tax rate? The current tax rate, and it's usually discussed as mills, but to make it simpler, I'm going to discuss it as percentages. The tax rate is 1.39998%. So to find out what your real estate taxes are, you multiply the assessed value of your home minus the homestead exemption times that number, which is 0.01399998. And I made a little show of what happens. Last year, if your house was assessed at $200,000, which is roughly the average of Philadelphia house value, you paid taxes on $155,000. You got the $45,000 exemption. Under this year's plan, your house would be assessed on average 31% more. So your assessed value would be $262,000, and you would get a larger homestead exemption, $80,000. But you would end up paying taxes on more than what you paid last year. Last year you would have paid on $155,000. This year you'd pay on $182,000. You would be paying 1.39998% times 27,000 more, which is $378 more this year than you paid last year. So all of the other programs that are coming into effect, we're hoping are going to do better. But for many people, this assessment, even with the help of counsel, is going to be a very large problem. And most of us pay mortgages, and most of us will see our mortgages go up because the mortgage company is going to take the tax increase and roll it into a mortgage payment. So you could see a mortgage increase as well as a real estate, as well as an home insurance rate increase, and you could see your mortgage going up significantly, which is a huge problem. One of the things that we know is happening with the increase in the real estate taxes is they are giving tax cuts to businesses. I'm going to stop there and let both of you comment if you want.
Well, so this is, I guess, not unexpected. But one of the questions I have about it, ostensibly, this is to create jobs. But I don't know that that's ever happened anytime any municipality, state, or national government has cut business taxes. I don't think it's ever really worked.
I was going to point that out. I have yet to see a business tax cut, which, you know, the folks in the business community will tell you, oh, you know, these are job generating tax cuts. Well, then show me one job that they've generated and we can talk. Because mostly what I see is a whole bunch of people who are already making outrageous sums of money, making even more outrageous sums of money, and doing so on the backs of the people that work for them. I mean, if you were at least giving the people that work for you a raise because you got this business tax cut, I could halfway respect that. But I can't respect it now because I know that's not where it's going.
Right.
And when you are doing this in the poorest big city in America, that kind of makes me scratch my head a little, because you know the circumstances. You know our schools are underfunded. You know that you have people that are borrowing from Peter to pay Paul just to keep a roof over their head, and our minimum wage stinks. So, you know, basically you're saying, hey, business community, let us pat you on the head. And I understand why it's being done. I understand why people are saying, oh, well, we need to lower the wage tax because people aren't coming here as often. And, you know, we've got to, you know, give them some money back and everything. I get it. But it doesn't make it right.
What I think is more interesting is we're being told that this was supposed to help Black and brown businesses, small businesses. But when you actually do the analysis, the rate reduction is so small that it actually has almost no savings for a business that has $1 million in revenues. Now, it's a little tricky because the business tax is both on gross revenues and on net profits. So it gets a little hard to break into the numbers. So I'm just saying in $1 million in revenues, the tax cutting, the savings under this plan is 0.0003. So if a business has combined gross and net profit revenues of $1 million, they save $300. That's a small business gets $300 back. And that's at the expense of homeowners paying hundreds and hundreds of dollars more. Now, if you're Urban Outfitters and you have a very large amount of money coming in, you get the same exact tax savings that the small mom and pop store, the small women-owned, Black and brown business-owned startup business gets. But of course, the savings for you isn't $300. You're saving $30,000. And this is a direct contrast to what Councilwoman Kiona Sanchez's bill was a number of years ago, where she used the homestead exemption for small businesses and said they wouldn't pay any taxes on their first $100,000. That's a bill that really helped keep small business taxes down without having much impact on Urban Outfitters. Because, of course, if Urban Outfitters is bringing in $1 billion a year, saving $100,000 on taxes is of no consequence. But the startup business, the startup nail salon, the startup restaurant, the startup a food cart, all of them have a tremendous benefit if they don't have to pay taxes on the first $100,000. So the big businesses get a huge tax break. The small businesses get next to nothing because the way that this tax cut was implemented was a flat tax reduction of 0.0003, and it's paid for by rising property taxes, which will, unfortunately, force some people out of their homes.
And Lance, this is shades of the wage tax cut, right? It's kind of the same thing. The wage tax cut is going to equal. Oh, and there you have it, right there.
We got.
Well, go ahead.
Well, you're exactly right. I mean, the wage tax cut takes $20.5 million out of the city's operating budget, money that could be used to deal with anti-violence programs, clean the streets, help the schools, wherever we think it's necessary. And the reduction, again, is incredibly small. So when you look at what we're doing, the wage tax cut is 0.00498%. A worker earning $30,000 will get a tax saving per year of $14.94. The city will lose $20.5 million. And somehow we're told that that is a good trade-off for us. And maybe it is, and maybe it isn't. I just think that people ought to be aware that collectively that money could be used to remove those cars, to clean the streets. One of my things of concern is the SEPTA safety. But wherever it is you think the money should go, would you rather have those services or $14.94 in your pocket? Of course, if you're making $300,000 a year, you're not saving $14.94. You're saving $140. But even that, if you're making $300,000 a year, is $140 a year savings more important to you than feeling safe when you go out to eat at that very nice restaurant, or when you go out to the Kimmel Center, or you go out to the art gallery, or the new museum, the new wing of the museum, which is absolutely spectacular? So those are the questions that were not asked, unfortunately, because the budget negotiations were kept to the last minute. And I don't think most of us knew that this is what was being discussed.
The lone thing I remember in my economics class is opportunity costs. If you did one thing, that meant you couldn't do another if they were of equal value. If you could only do one thing. And what I see there from what you're talking about is one of the best examples of opportunity costs I've seen in a while. The city could have taken this opportunity to use that $20.5 million to improve city services. but instead they've decided to give that cost as a tax credit. And let's keep it real. You can't even go to a movie for $14.94. I mean, you might be able to pay for a month and a half of Disney Plus and watch Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness on your television, but you can't even go to the movies for that much.
Well,
unless you go by yourself.
And we know how stretched thin the budget is. So an extra $20 million in any of the things you mentioned is really significant.
Well, that was why I started to ask Vincent about, and again, he's very gracious with his time. We're very fortunate to have him. That's why I started to ask him about the PICA bonds and the wage tax. We could have easily used, the city could have easily used that $20 million to make sure every pool opens, not 80%, but 100%. And we could have at the same time passed legislation that would require at least half of the PICA wage tax to be refunded to people. There are solutions to these issues, but the Chamber of Commerce was very successful in this budget in persuading people that giving tax breaks to businesses was what the city needed. And more power to them. You know, lobbyists who do a good job deserve credit for doing a good job. It doesn't necessarily mean that all of us who are without lobbyists benefited from it. But the chamber did an excellent job of persuading council members to say cutting the business taxes was going to help small businesses. And again, I don't think $300 a year on a small business is going to help it stay open or stay closed. And persuading that giving everyone $14 back a year was going to be a job creation. So they had the best story to tell, and other people were unable to tell their story. Perhaps had there been lobbyists for the pools, they would have been able to say, take the wage tax from PICA and open the pools for the next 2 years.
Yeah.
Now, what I'm hearing regarding the pools is that they couldn't get enough lifeguards.
Yeah, so things like that are always hard because normally people who want to have employees look around and say, if we're not paying enough, we'll just pay more. So when the city says they can't find enough lifeguards, it becomes, well, this was the problem last year and the year before, so it really shouldn't be a surprise this year. Help me understand what you did. Did you set up YMCAs where you paid people to get training? Did you increase the pay? Did you recruit from other places? It's hard to know how much of that is an inability to look at trends and predict what most of us think is predictable. We had this problem last year. We had the problem the year before. We're facing a similar problem in our schools. We can't fill the vacancies for teachers. That was a problem 2 years ago. It was a problem last year. Is it going to be a problem this year? Well, what steps are we taking to resolve those issues? So the lifeguard issue, I understand, but at what point do we say a problem should be solved, not used as an excuse to not do something?
Yeah. Well, Lance, thank you so much for that. And it's frustrating when you see things like this, and we're going to have some council members on in the coming weeks who can tell us a little bit more about this and what they think these cuts are going to do.
I also thought Vincent was very good at explaining how the budget gets passed when there's a mayor who is not very strong. But when there was a Mayor Street and a Mayor Rendell who had a much better relationship with the council president and had a much greater ability to, and perhaps cared much more to get votes for their budgets, the budget process was decidedly different than it was when there was a Mayor Nutter and a Mayor Kenny. And that becomes perhaps part of the difficulty. You have a mayor who introduces a budget without the expectation it will get passed. So there's not really a lot of thought about what we can aspire to. Instead, it is what can we put in it that we know is going to be taken out. And it's kind of the 3-card Monte game. We're not going to really tell you what we're interested in. We're going to put a lot of stuff, hide it, and ask you to guess what it is you can have and what it is you can't have. And, again, again, to fully disclose, I did work for Mayor Street, and I know other people have different opinions, but I feel very warmly towards him and feel that he is really a great thinker. And I have worked with Mayor Rendell or Governor Rendell for many years, so I have respect for him. But I'm just saying that there is a significant difference between strategic thinkers who put forward an agenda and say, this is where I want to be, this is what I want to get, versus mayors who put forward something where they kind of hide what they're looking for and know that council's not going to agree with it because they're not going to do the work before time to get council agreement.
Right. That's right. Well, we only have a couple minutes left. And so, Denise, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the work you're doing with VoteBeat and how it's relating to what we're seeing with the January 6th committee. Like, what are we talking about here?
Well, what we're talking about for all intents and purposes is what happens when people decide, or one side of the electoral equation decides that they're not going to honor the results of the election. Because let's be honest here, that's exactly what January 6th was all about. It was about one side deciding that it wasn't going to honor the decision of the electorate and do a peaceful transition of power. How that kind of relates to what I do at VoteBeat is I look at the system of the voting system because that's kind of what's under attack here. There's this perception, or there was the perception by the folks in the January 6th insurrection that votes were being brought in suitcases, or votes were being saved onto flash drives and counted illegally, or people who were actually dead were voting on the rolls. Now, granted, what you found, and it's kind of funny because John Featherman, the Democratic candidate for Senate, is basically owed a whole lot of money by Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, who told anybody that could find, voter fraud, that they would get $1 million from him. And John Fetterman found voter fraud among Republicans who were voting, on behalf of their dead relatives for Donald Trump. But, because this is one of those processes in which the hypocrisy is 90% of the program, that's not getting talked about. And what stood out to me yesterday, because I've been watching these hearings off and on, but what stood out to me yesterday was the testimony of the poll workers. The two women from Georgia who were poll workers in Fulton County, and their addresses were put on the internet, and people were coming to their house to protest and to harass them, and threatening to hang them and saying stuff like, you should be glad it's 2020, not 1920, because we'd have strung you up already, and stuff like that. What I'm hoping that people get when they sit down and they look at a piece on VoteBeat is what is actually happening, not what you're getting told.
Where can people find that?
You can find it at votebeat.org. And I have a piece coming up soon on Doug Mastriano's plan to make everybody re-register to vote and why that's not going to work.
All right, well, we'll look for that. We want to talk more about this in the coming weeks. Next week on the show, we will have two council members, Councilmember Cindy Bass and Councilmember Isaiah Thomas. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week.